Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Manic Energy. I'm Ryan Swar. Today, we're going to be talking to Ivor Ellul. Looking forward to a conversation on exploration, drilling, and a lot of things business. I'm Ryan Swar, and this is Manic Energy, a podcast that dives into the fast-moving world of energy, business, and the people powering it all. From bold ideas to real-world innovation, we're talking breakthroughs, market moves, and the community shaping what's next. Whether you're building for the future or just here for the fun, welcome to the chaos. Ivor, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you, Ryan. Good to be here.
So I think it'd be helpful if you just explain to our guests maybe some of your background. I understand you started in Malta. I'd love to know about your growth through exploration and other consulting types of services. I know you've got a storied history. Would you mind giving sort of a background?
Sure, be happy to. As you mentioned, I am originally from Malta. Malta is a very small island in the Mediterranean, just south of Sicily and north of Libya. And to the southwest, we have Tunisia. So it's kind of smack in the middle of the Mediterranean. Lots of history associated with Malta, going all the way back to prehistoric times. There's some of the earliest settlements on Earth there. And then more recently, 16th century, during the times of the Crusades, when Malta played a very big part in that and almost came under the realm of the Ottoman Empire, but we managed to defeat the Turks thanks to the knights that we had on the island. And then more recently, Second World War played a big role in the Second World War. As you can imagine, the position of Malta was very critical, given that, again, it's smack in the middle of the Mediterranean. To the north, we had Italy, part of the Axis. To the south, we had the Germans with Rommel taking North Africa. And so when it came time to invade Italy, post the landings, the D-Day landings, then Malta played a very big part in supplying the troops as they headed on into Italy and started basically the movement up Italy. And that was kind of the end of the Second World War in 1945. So lots of history. Very, very interesting place. I go there at least once a year, sometimes twice, times even 3 times. Any excuse I can get to go back to Malta. I've got family still there, but lovely place. Certainly recommend it.
When did you move here from Malta or to the U.S. from Malta?
So I moved permanently to the U.S. in 1991, but that was really via London. I spent about 7 years or so in London. In Malta, I did my first degree at the university there in mechanical engineering. And then I always had this intrigue, if you will, to really look at oil and gas and petroleum engineering, somewhat driven by the fact that my father spent time working for Aramco in Saudi Arabia. So he was based there and he used to travel back and forth. And we're talking the 70s here, yeah? So that's the heydays of oil and gas exploration in the Middle East. And he used to come back with these mega project stories about mega projects and his involvement. So I really got intrigued. So long story short, the first opportunity that I had to actually go and conduct postgraduate studies in London was in 1981, when I went to London to study for a master's in petroleum engineering. For a year before that, I worked in Germany, which was West Germany at the time. I'm dating myself here a little bit. And that was more involved in the design and construction of large-scale oil storage tanks and refineries. Then I went to London, did a master's, came back to Malta, and worked in North Africa, in Libya, Tunisia, for a short while, about a year or so. But in London, at Imperial College, is where I did my master's. I made mention of the fact that I'd love to come back and do research. And eventually, lo and behold, a scholarship came through funded by British Petroleum at the time. And so I went back in 1984 to start my PhD at Imperial College in London. And I was there until basically I finished my PhD in 87, 88, and then joined the consulting company. And I eventually transferred to Houston with that consulting company in 1991. And I've been here ever since. So I'm almost a Texan.
And you said you still get to go back every now and then. What was the focus of your PhD? Was that also petroleum engineering?
It was an element of petroleum engineering. It was basically studying the flow of fluids and pipelines. And when I say fluids, you can have gas, you can have oil, or you can have a mixture. And once you have a mixture, it gets even more complicated to understand what actually happens. And that's what I was studying. It was a numerical type research project, looking at the flow of fluids in complex geometries like curvature and orifices. It was 3D. And just to give you an idea, so I started in 1984, and very, very heavy computing was required. And the mainframes that I was running on at the University of London, and the University of London had access to Cray computers, which were at the time the most powerful computer on Earth. And the amount of memory that we had, the ability to access, was less than what I have on my iPhone. So it was interesting. Looking back, it was really interesting conducting all of that analysis and everything when compared to what horsepower we have nowadays. But that's what it was basically: flow fluids and pipelines.
So then at some point you transitioned into exploration, or maybe from research into consulting and into industry?
Yes, exactly. So very memorable for me. I was finishing my research in London on a Sunday morning, drinking my cup of tea and reading the Sunday Times newspaper. And I come across this ad, which seemed to have been written for me with a consulting company, a US-based consulting company, but with an office in London, which talked about they needed somebody who could do numerical modeling of multi-phase flow in pipelines. And I was like, oh my gosh, this has been written for me. So I applied and actually managed to get the job. So I started in London doing a mix of consulting and product development. We were developing multi-phase and single-phase flow of fluids in gas and liquid in pipeline networks, complex pipeline networks. And so that's how I started in the industry. What was interesting about it is it wasn't just software development. It was also quite a bit of consulting involved. And I ended up working on some very interesting projects, one of which was a very sad project, very tragic project, the Piper Alpha disaster. Piper Alpha was a platform in the North Sea that basically exploded in 1988, July of 1988. And the company I worked for was brought in by the Department of Energy at the time in the UK to help them tell us what happened. And so we gathered all the data and we did all the modeling associated with that. And we did indeed tell them what happened and when. And then I eventually testified on the public inquiry in Aberdeen in 1989, the Lord Cullen inquiry. Very, very interesting project. Burnt a lot of nights working on that project, but very interesting. Probably one of the most exciting projects I worked through in my career.
You know, I would imagine, or I believe probably a good portion of our listeners on our show today probably don't understand a lot about fluid modeling or what you were talking about, or flow modeling. But it's not just about efficiency of the products moving, it's also about safety, right?
Correct. A big element of safety, which and what's interesting is that whenever something like Piper Alpha happened, or else people will relate more to the Deepwater Horizon disaster here, where 11 people actually lost their lives. Very sad again. There are mistakes that are made, human nature, more often than not avoidable. But then you learn, and the new regulations get put into place in order to make sure that doesn't happen again. Yeah. And you asked earlier on, right? How did I transition to, we call it upstream? Yeah, the oil and gas industry has got upstream, midstream, downstream. Midstream is pipelines to refineries, and then downstream distribution. How do we get gas, into our homes and that sort of thing? But coming to Houston with the company that I worked for in London, then I eventually left that company and joined actually the competitor, as it happens. And they were focused on studying what happens not so much in pipelines, but in the subsurface, in the reservoirs. And they had products called reservoir simulation products that are to this day the go-to software of choice in modeling the subsurface reservoir. And so I joined that company. I also transitioned from a technical role to a sales and marketing role. Again, I wanted to continue to basically build my career, and that was the next step. And we were doing very well, to the extent that we were acquired by Schlumberger, the largest oilfield services company out there, which is now called SLB. And so I worked for SLB, or Schlumberger at the time, for about a year and a half, and then kept on moving upstream, looking at the geological aspects of what happens, how the geology features in oil and gas being basically created, deposited in the subsurface, and then eventually doing the modeling and being produced.
It must have been quite the transition going from that technical role, research, to a technical role, to sales and marketing. Was it as much fun or more fun? I just have to know.
Well, it was more fun, and maybe there was always an element of salesman in me.
Yeah.
And you never know it, because I used to enjoy, even when I was purely technical, supporting the sales and marketing guys going out there and presenting to clients and closing large projects. I always got a kick out of that. And then you get into that whole frame of mind where you're pursuing these large scale projects. We're talking about $1 million, maybe more. And you get quite a kick out of going in, competing against others out there, and then eventually landing one, and beyond that, then delivering to the client and adding value in the whole process.
You're speaking my language there, and you mentioned the different segments of the industry before. I mean, the bulk of my career has been in the midstream and a little bit in downstream, but very little in upstream. So certainly learning a lot. So there was quite a bit of development in the U.S., realistically over the last, I guess you'd call it, a couple of decades. Were you pretty involved in, the various shale plays and other things that have happened throughout the U.S.?
Yes. So again, career-wise progression went from working with this group that was developing technology and providing consulting in the geological sphere of reference. It was a Norwegian company, a Norwegian drilling company, as it happens, very well known, deep water drilling company. To the extent that we're talking end of 1989, oil was at $10 a barrel. And I was president of the Americas division, so North and Latin America. And we were doing quite well. But industry downturn, obviously, oil price goes down, everybody cuts back, so they're not buying software, they're not bringing in consulting companies. And I was told to basically cut costs, as one does. I was the president of the company, so I was told, okay, Ivor, cut costs. So the biggest cost for us was personnel, and one hates to go down that route. But what I did with this company was that basically I said, okay, we can certainly go down that route, put together a list of personnel. And by the way, I'm putting myself at the top of the list, being probably one of the most expensive. And also, I thought this was the sign, the impetus for me to start my own consulting company. So with oil price at the lowest it's been, everybody thought there was a screw loose in my head with starting my own company. And I did, together with another partner. We set up a consulting company called Knowledge Reservoir that focused on deep water consulting. So again, if you look at the time frame, 98, 99, companies were making the first discoveries in the deep water Gulf of Mexico, which to this day is quite a significant province of production, and which was one of the elements that put the US on the map when it comes to world oil and gas production. And so we managed to put together basically the first consulting group in the industry that were experts in deep water. And we took off, basically, from starting in 99 to 2007. So you've got 7 to 8 years. By the end of that time period, we were revenuing at about $40 million per year, which for a consulting company is quite significant, actually.
From startup to there in 8 years, you said. Yeah, that's pretty significant growth.
Yes.
So,
and it
so
was
that must
fun.
be a couple hundred people at least, right?
Exactly. A couple of hundred, and then basically a database of about 5,000 to 8,000 consultants, contractors who we used to bring in as necessary. And we used to, build teams for projects. One of the most exciting projects we had was in Argentina for Repsol YPF, where we were asked to review 8 of their fields. And we put teams on that. We had to actually take extra office space in Houston because we had a team of about 25 people working full-time on that project, delivering studies on each of these fields, traveling to Argentina. I was lucky to go to Buenos Aires a few times. And the client was very happy. At the end of the day, you obviously enjoy making bring in revenue and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's knowing that the client is satisfied and you've delivered value to the client that really makes it all worthwhile.
There's nothing that quite feels like that email when you get that appreciation email or, thanks so much. Without you, we couldn't have done this type of thing.
Yes,
I think
indeed.
I've only received like 1 or 2 of those even in my career. They just something to be celebrated for sure. And every now and then we get our employees, somebody will get one. It's like, you've got to service it. We need to talk about this because that's what it's all for. Is you made something safer, you made it more efficient, you improved it in a way nobody else might have. It's a lot of fun, isn't it?
Indeed.
So you're no longer with Knowledge Reservoir. You ended up that kind of grew and then.
No, I sold the company eventually in 2013 to a British consulting company, publicly listed consulting company. And then stayed on with that company for 2 years. And then eventually struck out on my own, which is what I'm doing at the moment. I've got my own consulting company. And I actually provide consulting in a number of areas in the industry. Still oil and gas, mostly upstream, midstream, some downstream as it happens. And so I've been, fairly busy for the last, 10 years, I guess it is, isn't it? Working on various projects.
So you'd said like energy consulting. I think at one point you had mentioned to me anyhow expert witness testimony as well.
Okay. Yes.
It's not something I've done myself. You might have to give us some insight as to what that looks like.
Yes. Quite interesting, quite stressful, quite lucrative. But I guess that goes with the stress. But yes, a few of those. Well, I had the first instance of that way early in my career again on the Piper Alpha public inquiry headed by Lord Cullen at the time, but then never considered doing that again until later on when I was working for the company I sold my company to, and they were brought in by a legal firm based out of Paris. And there are worse places to do business than Paris, as you can imagine. And so we had a team that actually traveled to Paris, and it was actually an interesting project because it related to a South American country expropriating, taking over two oil field blocks from, on the one hand, a French company, and on the other hand, a US-based company. And so when that happens, obviously the two parties are at odds, and you end up in arbitration. Yeah, and so it will be a tribunal, an arbitral tribunal, as it's called, based in Paris, where both sides have to basically come in and present their arguments. And we were brought in as a technical consultant to the French legal firm that was acting on behalf of the South American country. And so we had to build our case. And we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here. In fact, billions plus when it comes to, well, the oil company comes in and says, you took my fields. You just took them and kicked us out. And so we have lost, since the day that you took them, we have lost $800 million in revenue and whatnot. And then on our side, we'll go and say, well, yes, you probably would have lost some, but it wasn't 800 million. Why? Because of all of these technical arguments. And that's the toing and froing. And you will have to basically provide expert testimony in front of a tribunal, which is usually three arbiters. And you get grilled. You get grilled by them. You get even more grilled by the other side, who try to discredit every single word you've written and say. So that's where the stress comes in. But it's still quite interesting, because if you've got a good technical argument and you've done your homework, then you should be fine.
Sounds a bit stressful. We've had a few employees that have participated, and I've watched some of that stress unfold, but really from the sideline, not really being able to help. We talked a little bit before about, I believe you were the chair with SPE, Society of Petroleum Engineers, and then maybe PSIG. I think it'd be great to talk a little bit about what those are and what your role in those foundations have been, or those groups.
Sure. So these are not-for-profit organizations, that operate and address a particular element of, again, in this case, the SPE is the Society of Petroleum Engineers. So it's focused exclusively on the upstream part of the industry. Yeah? And so my history with SPE is kind of interesting, quite long-lived in many ways. So when I was a student at Imperial, this was 1981, started my MSc. One of the lecturers there put a form in front of me, and he said, look, this is the SPE. This is the one society that really is leading when it comes to upstream, and reservoir engineering and all of that. Said, just sign up for it. I said, yeah, sure, okay. So signed, and that's it. And then throughout my term in London at Imperial, they used to have these student paper contests where you go and you present stuff you're working on, and I did. And I won the competition, and I got a little bit of a prize, which was nice at the time. But, this is kind of cool. Worthwhile putting it together. And then when I was doing my PhD there, when I went back and was doing my PhD, there were scholarships that I applied for and managed to win, which really, and there were not insignificant scholarships, which really helped me from a cash perspective. I was a student, didn't have a dime, I was living in London. You can imagine how expensive London is. So I never forgot that, really. And coming to the US, it was always kind of, I made a mental point that at some stage I'll give back to the SPE. And so I did. I was invited to join their web development committee here. I was based in Houston, and from that was involved in the Society of Petroleum Engineers International Committee that took their website to the next level. And then from then on, I ended up becoming chair of the Gulf Coast section, which at the time was the largest section in the SPE. Now the Middle Eastern sections are a bit bigger. And so that was a 3-year exercise, starting as vice chair, and then past chair. And that was quite involved, in that you're running a significant number of conferences, workshops. You're responsible for pretty much the P&L of the organization, the local organization, reporting into the international group. And it's all to do with disseminating technical information as it relates to petroleum engineering, the upstream side of the business. Having to deal with the ups and downs, I was I drew a short straw a little bit, because when I took over, oil price went down, rig count started dropping like a stone, and it was like trying to, circle the wagon and say, so what are you going to do now? How are you going to conserve? Again, sponsorships dry up, whereas Chevron, for example, would write you a $25,000 check to sponsor a particular event, then say, we're not sponsoring anything this year, kind of thing, right? So we lived through that, and we established a few very interesting initiatives, like an endowment fund for scholarships and everything, which to this day continues to grow. So that was quite interesting, and to this day I'm involved in the SPE. On the pipeline side, I've been chair of the Pipeline Simulation Interest Group, as it's known, for over 20 years. And again, this harks back to my interest in the modeling of pipelines. So I stayed involved in whatever element of business I was involved in. I stayed involved in PSIG. And we host a conference every year in May, either in the US or in Europe. We've had a couple in Europe. In fact, next year, May 2026, will be in Amsterdam. So we're starting to prepare for that. In fact, we've got our 2-day board meeting coming up this week. And we've got a record number of abstracts submitted for the Amsterdam conference. That tells me, Amsterdam it's an interesting location. People want to go to Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. And it's a once a year event, really, but you spend kind of the remainder of the year kind of planning for that.
You mentioned something earlier that I'd like to dig back into a little bit. You mentioned, and I've been through this myself, I think I talked about it on an earlier episode that's out already, about, hey, you're not performing well, sort of we need a list of people, especially when as a consulting business, people are your highest cost by a lot. And then that sort of prompted you to then go out on your own and start your own consulting business. So I'm really interested to dig into that a little bit. I probably got to, with how fast it sounded like you grew, probably got some interesting stories, not just in technical, it sounds pretty well-rounded, but also sales and marketing, but growing and starting and growing a business at that pace is a lot of fun and difficult as well. Any sort of lessons in leadership or what it takes to bring a new business from the ground up to something that 10, 15 years later sounds like you've also exited successfully?
Yes. Quite a few lessons, as you might imagine, over the course of, 12, 13 years. The ones that really stay at the top of my mind is one that relates to people, and that is, it's all about the people. It's all about the people with respect to who it is that you bring in as part of your team. I know this sounds very cliche-ish, but you do try and hire people who are better than you. A lot of managers get really weirded out about, oh man, this guy is really good, and this lady here is more qualified than I am. So, I'm not sure I'd want her on my team because she's going to show me up. Well, so be it. I mean, it's the team that delivers. The clients see the team. They don't just see whoever runs the company. As the company gets bigger, they will probably see less and less of you. So it's all about the people. And you spend quite a bit of time nurturing people, and we brought in our consultants. Some of them had a tremendous amount of experience, some of the best consultants in the industry. I work with some of them to this day. I'm working on a project based in Colombia, and I've got a team of consultants who are working with me that are top notch and who I've worked with in the past.
Sorry if I can, is that like they're consulting with your business, or they're sort of like a subcontract arrangement where, you're trying to solve a problem for a customer and you need various expertise that you bring in alongside
It's
you?
probably a bit more of the latter. Yeah,
Okay.
that you've got a project to deliver, you've got a study to deliver, and the study is comprised of a number of elements. And each element, would need a specific expert to come in and provide their inputs and solve these specific problems. And so that's how the team comes together, really.
Makes a lot of sense. I've even had, I guess you'd call people competitors, but where you keep in touch with them and then something comes up that's just too big to tackle. And so you call your
Really?
or a problem that's difficult to solve. And that phoning has always come in handy, trying to reach out to people that come help solve it with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other element, Ryan, is you really need to listen to the industry.
Yeah.
And I won't say morphed, but we did evolve as knowledge reservoir along the way, and that's how we grew. Because our clients were saying, look, we didn't need this element of a service that we'd like you to provide. And, some consulting companies are very pure. Oh, no, we don't do that. Yeah, we only do this. Well, then you don't grow, right? And that's how we grew. We grew functionally in what we were able to deliver. And then we grew internationally. And this was the fun part, and the part that I did most of. That, we'd grown in the US, we were working in the Permian, we were working in the unconventionals, we were working in deep water. Okay, so where do we go next? Okay, let's grow internationally. And so our first international office was in the UK. We started in Aberdeen, Scotland, which was a very similar province to the one that we were working on in the deep water Gulf of Mexico. But we found that really that's a saturated consulting environment. So we moved to London, and from London, we were able to venture into Europe and other places. The next office that we opened was in Muscat in Oman. And that was very, very interesting. Oman is a beautiful place. They're probably one of the most interesting places in the Middle East. And then we had to also cover the Far East, and we opened an office in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And that really is how the company expanded. And that whole geographical expansion was really, really a lot of fun and very interesting.
Did you wrestle at all with language barriers and finding, somebody to represent the organization, or I'm just curious how you took on that growth? Do you find a trusted partner and have them enter that new country?
In every country, in every province, region, you will have to work with partners. Mm-hmm. There is no way that you're going to just, land in the country and say, okay, you put up your shingle and everyone is going to come to you. That just simply that some groups think that that's the way it's done. It just doesn't work. So we had partners, not so much in the UK, because the UK was a known province. I mean, I came from the UK, so I kind of knew how to do business there. But in the Middle East, we had to have a local partner, which we did. We found, and again, it's always interesting how you end up selecting your partner. It's usually word of mouth, and this group suggests this group, and that sort of thing. And similarly in KL in Malaysia. And then you have to go through the complex process of setting up the company, because you have to have a local entity. And that in each country, that's where the challenge is. It's not so much a language challenge, because Malaysia will speak English, same thing in the Middle East, yeah, and in the UK, obviously. So it's a different kind of English. But yeah, it's more of the legal structure of the companies that get, and tax, associated with that gets to be quite complex. So then you have to have local experts, local tax advisors, and everything that you bring in as you go along.
You say listen to the people and listen to the market.
Mhm.
In terms of listening, I mean, first of all, you're right. The people that you work with is sort of, for me, what makes it worthwhile each and every day. And when it's feeling challenging and when you're having a lot of fun. And I think you're right. For me, bringing people in that are better, it's always part of the journey, or at least people that grow better. That's fun to watch as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
In terms of listening to the market, it sounds like the focus was on expansion, but is it also about market conditions and sort of when not to expand?
Very much so. Again, what I found very interesting, when the Permian and the unconventional
Yeah.
was really, really taking off. And here we were, consulting company, lots of experts, lots of expertise, PhDs and whatnot. And we couldn't find a venue for our consulting, which was actually very, very surprising. And I just couldn't understand. I challenged my sales and marketing team. What's going on here? And it was interesting because the industry was moving so fast that by the time you go in and perform a quote unquote study, they would have drilled a bunch of wells. Yeah. And they told us that. So we had to tune our approach. We had to tune our service. We had to tune the way we do business and how we provide advice, and totally basically stand it on its head to be able to enter that market. And that's how you have to listen to the market, because if you stay, okay, this is a try true approach and this is how we do business and these are the studies that we do, then you won't grow.
So that was like sort of the time frame. It sounds like that the heydays are in the most recent history. I think that you
Hmm.
were talking about in terms of how busy things were. It feels they've slowed, quite a bit.
Hmm.
So has it sort of gone back to that longer runway before drilling, or where you have more time, or is it still that fast today? Really, I'm speaking about in the U.S.
It's still pretty rapid in the time frame from studying an aspect of the business and then making a decision. And so you have to be prepared to provide very rapid, very focused, and very appropriate advice, because things move without you, really.
And the technology's advanced even in that time frame as well, has it not?
Very much so. Very much so. And now there's a lot of knowledge, yeah, in what we
Really?
do. And this leads straight into the whole AI discussion, right? That there's so much known about these reservoirs, so many wells drilled in these. There's so much data there that the traditional ways of going about and doing these long-winded studies were kind of gone. Yeah, we can go, and you might be able to focus on one aspect of it and do a longer term, more in-depth study. But from a perspective of, we've got so much data that you can aggregate it and basically find the trends in that data and
In
then use those to make decisions.
in under a minute.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fast. Have you used it much, or have you started using AI platforms at all?
Me personally, to be honest, not that much, other than using Copilot and Chat GPT and all of that good stuff. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
everybody does that. But from a technology perspective, to be honest, I don't think we're there yet. Moving very fast in that direction, but I don't think we're there yet.
Hmm. Yeah, it's advancing pretty rapidly. I've worked
Hmm.
with some pretty smart people that, I mean, some of the things they're doing with it just, amazes me. It's like, I could have done that, but not as well, and it would have taken me 2 days. You got that back in 10 minutes. Like, this is
Hmm.
outrageous. It's good. It's pretty powerful stuff. I think you're right. It's going to accelerate things even faster. Do you see sort of exploration and growth, in the US continuing in the short term, or like in the horizon?
I think it's slowed down quite a bit. Again, it also depends on the various administrations that are in place at the time. But rank exploration compared to what it was in the 90s, early 90s and beyond, that has slowed down significantly. It won't stop, yeah, while there is a transition taking place, which everyone talks about We will continue to produce oil and gas for a long time to come. Only we're a lot more conscious of how we produce it and how we actually try and maintain and conserve our environment, looking at emissions and everything that we do. I mean, there's a lot of times where you look at elements of going about exploration, and as you're doing that, you need power, and as you are using up power, you've got emissions. So how do you capture those emissions to try and get as close to a net zero kind of operation as you can? So there's a lot of much more in-depth thought when it comes to that sort of thing nowadays, yeah, compared to in the past where it's kind of open season in anything that you do.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you think, at least from your perspective, that transition is obviously being prioritized, and you're talking about transition towards, I guess we'd call renewable forms of energy, or even just solar, wind, hydro, and whatnot. But your perspective is oil and gas is still going to be pretty relied upon for probably our lifetimes, right?
For sure. For sure, no question. But everybody's working towards getting into the cleaner forms. So, for example, one of the projects I've been working on is LNG.
If you would, I mean, I'm well aware of it, but I assume that somebody doesn't know anything about the industry that might be listening. What is LNG?
Sure, LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. That is, you've got gas, and gas you can transport it by pipeline, but it's difficult to ship it overseas as opposed to oil. You stick it in a tanker, and the tanker can go anywhere in the world, yeah? But gas, it's a bit more difficult, yeah, because it's gas and you can't transport a lot of it. So what you do is you liquefy it, yeah? You bring it down to about minus 262 degrees, and it's in its liquid form, and then you put it in a tanker, specialized tankers with specific walls that are very highly insulated. And you put the liquefied natural gas in there, and it transports in its liquefied form. So you can fill an LNG carrier here in the US, and there are many LNG plants, facilities here, especially in the Gulf of Mexico, where you can fill these carriers and send them anywhere in the world. So, for example, where's the big need? Japan has always been a big need. Europe has been, but even more so since the issue with Russia invading Ukraine and all of the Russian gas that was coming to Europe now being stopped. So the Europeans now rely on significant amounts of liquefied natural gas that gets shipped into Europe. And what happens is when these carriers berth into a European port, whichever that may be, then you take this liquefied natural gas and you regasify it. Basically, you warm it up, and then it becomes gas again. And then you can transport it onshore with via pipelines and what have you. Now
and at scale, this is really only coming from where? The U.S. and Qatar, or?
A number of places. So Qatar traditionally has been a big source. Algeria, one of the very early LNG producers. U.S. because of the Permian and all the gas flowing down to the Gulf of Mexico, Louisiana. There's quite a few areas where there's LNG plants now and more coming in. British Columbia, Canada, again, gas coming from the Canadian provinces. Now, Africa, you've got places like Mozambique that have got significant gas reserves. And then some new provinces like the northern part of South America, a place like Guyana, who are producing quite a significant amount of oil and eventually gas that could actually ship that as LNG. Mm-hmm. So you see, again, as part of the transition, you're moving away from the heavier fuels to the lighter fuels, which when combusted release less emissions. So we're heading in the right direction.
You're saying transitioning from oils to things like natural gas and transporting liquefied natural gas.
Right.
Yep, I
There are
agree.
some regions which to this day burn heavy oil, which are the worst when it comes to emissions. Now, if you take that and you convert it to a gas power plant, then the emissions are much less.
It even have a lot of places burning biomass and things like that, right?
Indeed. Yeah.
So what do you see as next, I guess, in the energy landscape, or if you had your crystal ball? I always like to ask this question. What do you see happening in the future? Does the transition to renewable forms of energy, or even things like nuclear, continue to accelerate, or does the reliance on natural gas, probably domestically for the U.S., and LNG internationally, pick up pace itself?
Um, Obviously, the transition to renewables will continue. We will continue to produce the oil part of oil and gas. One of the reasons being that all plastics come from oil, right? So it's not as if we're going to, a lot of groups think, okay, we're just going to turn off the faucets, shut it all down, and that would be great, yeah. Well, you can't really do that. So, and that's why it's called a transition, yeah, because you're transitioning to cleaner fuels as you go forward. Um, Solar and wind will continue to pick up, although even to this day, the percentages are still low. I'd say, and you mentioned this, I'd say nuclear is one of, in many ways, the cleanest energies. When you think about it, zero emissions. The elements of safety are, I'd say, fairly well understood. There's been, a few issues, a few incidents that the world has gone through, and as a result, one does learn, obviously. The transition from large scale power stations through 3 Mile Island type and what have you, to what are known as pocket reactors or SMEs, I think they're called, small medium energy reactors, where you can take something like this and put it in a location and produce energy.
It feels to me like the boom is things are happening just misaligned, unfortunately, for all of us. What I'm referring to really is, if you look back, and again, thinking domestically, um, power consumption in the U.S. has been relatively stable, or had been relatively stable for a couple of decades, right? And now we're staring at a pretty significant incline, and we're already seeing it, hearing about it, driven by many things. But first and foremost is the significant investment in building out data centers, and have demands for what? Large amounts of water and large amounts of power. It seems to me like natural gas is probably the clear winner in the feedstock for fueling these things, gas to electric, that is. Whether that be from a local grid or on site with generators. But those pocket sort of SMEs, as you said, it seems like those would be better for it. But the permitting timelines are still pretty long, as I understand it, right? You're probably still talking, almost a decade.
Oh, for sure.
5 to 10 years to get one of those permitted.
Yeah. No question. But again, I'm a big believer in people call it transition. It's more of an evolution, I think, than a transition. I think transition is a bit of a misnomer. But yes, thinking in the future, as you mentioned, beyond our lifetime, certainly mine. Yeah, looking into the future. So what's going to happen? You think about your kids and your grandkids and all of that sort of thing. So what's going to happen in their time? You really need to plan for that. And it's very important to do so. That you leave an environment that there are no issues with, as opposed to a whole bunch of problems, really. Eh?
Well, it feels like there's an appetite for now. We want clean now. But I mean, I remember growing up as a kid, and you'd have to have the oil tank in the basement filled, and it would smell down there for a day to a week. And this just, I was pretty young. It's just what I remember of it. And of course, that's not exactly like that anymore.
Yes,
that transition to natural gas, that transition to, I mean, where's this electricity coming from? a coal-fired power plant, which is now a natural gas-fired power plant.
Right.
And at my house, I have propane, so liquid propane that gets delivered. You're right. I mean, it seems like more of a generational thing. I'd be curious to see if it advances at a faster pace with things like AI. But I think you're right. It seems like nuclear is where it's likely heading from the most efficient perspective, if that is the end goal. Just curious on the timeline. So what do you think that?
As you say, Ryan, the thirst for energy, for power, is growing exponentially.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the real reason why you can't say, oh, okay, we're transitioning away from oil and gas or what have you, because the need for power is growing so rapidly. Yep. How do you address that?
Yeah, I think it's like all of the above is what it feels like. All the above solutions, that is. No single source of energy being the clear winner, just pursuing all that you could. Well, I appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights today. Anything else that you wanted to cover or ask me?
I think we covered a lot of ground here, and I didn't keep track of time, but in the minutes that we've had, it's been very interesting. Thanks for the invite. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for telling us about your background and your industry insights, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
You bet.
That's a wrap on this episode of Manic Energy, where the only constant is change. If you're fired up, do us a solid. Follow the show, leave a quick review, or send it to a friend. Got questions, ideas, or a topic you want us to dig into? Drop us a line at the link in the show description. Thanks for riding the current with us. Until next time, stay charged.